Fossils. A fossil is a preserved remain or some sort of evidence that something living was there. A fossil could be an original skeleton replaced by minerals. It could be teeth. It could be a shell. It could be a mold or a cast, and that's something that we'll be talking about today. What is a mold? What is a cast? Mold, if you think about your Jello mold, or your cake mold, it's the actual indentation. The cast, however, is the mineral that you filled in that mold. If you had a little ice mold, we had a little ice mold that had little emoji faces, so that when you poured the water in and then you froze it, you pop out the ice cubes, and then the ice cubes had these little emoji faces on it. Well, the little silicone or plastic container that had the faces on it, that would be the mold. The ice cube that took the shape of that mold is called the cast. So you need to know what a mold is and what a cast is. So the mold is actually the material that maybe has the shape, and then when you pour maybe concrete or plaster or ice or water in there and it freezes, that would then form the cast. Fossils can be materials that have replaced once living things, like minerals. Fossils may not even be that actual bone or animal. It could be a footprint or a little space where worms dug through, and then that hole that the worm dug through solidified and became a fossil. So that's an evidence that that worm was there. So it doesn't actually have to be the actual organism. It could be a footprint or some sign that it was there. It could even be fossilized poop, and we'll talk about what that is and what that is called. Now, a fossil can form basically in two ways. Number one, when living things die and then they're buried by sediments piling over them. This can happen very quickly when maybe if there's a flood or some sort of burial of the organism by sediments. The sediments slowly harden into rock with pressure, and basically they preserve the shape of the organism. When that organism starts rotting and breaking down, it will then create a mold. Now, another example would be rapid burial and the lack of oxygen. Okay, so the focus is on the burial by sediments. Okay, it can happen slowly, and then another one would be rapid burial and the lack of oxygen. So the lack of oxygen can actually create a fossil. Paleontology is the term that describes the science of studying and classifying fossils. The 5 types of fossils we're going to talk about are petrified fossils, trace fossils, molds, casts, and carbon films. So a petrified fossil basically is when minerals replace all the organic parts of the organism. So petrified means to turn to stone. So basically minerals replace the bones. So when you see a fossilized dinosaur, they're not actually the bones. It's actually the minerals that replaced or took the spot of the bone. Okay, it turned the bone into mineral because of the conditions that were there. Okay, so water is full of dissolved minerals, and basically that water seeps into the sediment and reaches the dead organism. Basically, the water will evaporate out of the soil, and then that will leave the minerals, and the minerals harden in what is left behind of the organism. Here we have petrified wood. Okay, petrified wood is no longer organic. It's not wood. It's actually just minerals filling in the space of where the tree used to be, as the tree is covered by the sediment. So you can see there's iron oxides, which is a compound. We learned that is iron and oxygen. That's Fe2O3. There's manganese. There's oxides, there's silicon, there's copper, okay, in this fossilized tree. So it's the minerals replacing the organic material. Okay, here we have molds and casts. Molds are imprints. These imprints are basically, like we talked about before, when the sediments lay on top of the organism, okay, squish it down, and then basically the dead organism makes a pattern inside all the inside the ground. Then the organism starts breaking down. You have all the organic material, the flesh, the bones, the fur starts breaking down and basically completely disintegrates, but you still have that shape of the fossil, that shape of the organism. Then minerals start seeping through. And so what was left behind, that shape of the fossil, that's the mold, the imprint, right? Now the minerals come down and fill that space, and when the minerals solidify, it takes the shape. That would be the cast. So you have the mold, which is what the original organism made, and it's the imprint. And then when minerals fill that mold or imprint, that forms a cast. Carbon films. Basically, when you have an organic organism, like a plant or animal, usually a smaller thing there, when you have the sediment squishing down on it, usually what's left behind is carbon. It creates kind of like a picture mark, and that picture mark is from the carbon that's left behind from the plants or animals. Now, plants usually are going to have a lot of carbon films. Smaller animals like dragonflies or insects, maybe some lizards, will also leave behind a carbon film. Trace fossils. Trace fossils, remember, we don't have the organism at all. We just have what's left behind showing that the organism was there. So we have footprints, we have maybe little wormholes, we have coprolites, okay? We have coprolites. Those are fossilized poop. Okay, 3 ways in which we can have preserved remains of once living organisms without it turning into an actual mineral fossil. We can actually have flesh or fur. These things can be solidified and save. These things can preserve DNA. One is amber. Amber is actually tree sap that is fossilized. So if the tree sap landed on an insect and trapped the insect inside, and then that amber fossilized, basically that's your preserved remains. If you watch Jurassic Park, that was the main thing, that they were able to drill and get the DNA from the little mosquito. So that was the whole premise of the movie that it was based on, was the preserved remains, the blood, the DNA that the mosquito got. The tar pits, they trap different things such as mammoths and so forth, and keeps the bones from decaying. Okay, and then the last thing is ice. Mammoths as well have been found, in which mammoths have been found preserved inside the ice, preserving hair and other parts of the organism. I think there was a mammoth that they found that it was still chewing food. So there was actually organic material, plants inside its mouth that didn't break down yet.